to revisit Daniel. We realized that he talked starting at about the age of 18 when he was finished with his 3-year liberal arts education pertaining to Persia and Babylon and that whole geographical area. So when he gave his first series of prophecies, certain things came up. He prophesied that Jerusalem would be destroyed, then be rebuilt. We know that came to pass. That was true. He talked about the rise and fall of the Gentile nations, and Gentile nations just means any nation that was not Jewish. So that would be Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. That came to pass, the rise and fall. He also prophesied the birth and death of the Messiah, Jesus Christ. That came to pass. We know that. And then things that have not been fulfilled yet, according to his prophecy, would be the time of troubles, which we call the tribulation, 7 years after the rapture. And then also the time of righteousness, which would be the 1,000-year reign of Christ on earth. So those are things that have not happened yet. And at some point in time, the rapture will occur. And when that occurs, the church, which is us, all believers, the church, all believers, will be lifted up, living and dead. And then the tribulation will start, and there'll be a time of 3.5 years of really happiness and good stuff, headed by this person who will be the Antichrist. And then there will be 3.5 years of utter turmoil towards all people who won't receive the mark of the beast, meaning following Satan and the Antichrist. Going to be a really, really bad time for the people that are left. And good news is we won't be part of it. We'll be there. We'll be in heaven with the Lord. So this is what the future holds for us. And when we get to this last part of Daniel's 6th chapter, we realize that he has been serving King Darius, the Persian king, faithfully and with excellence. And he has a plan that he wants to promote Daniel, going to make him like the vice king of the Medo-Persian Empire. And all of these other people that were his associates in running the business of the countries, that would be the other 2 commissioners. There were 3 commissioners altogether. Daniel was one of them. Then there were 2 others. And then there were 120 satraps, which are basically governors. So the territory of the Persian Empire, the Babylonian Empire, and all that it entailed was divided up into 120 different sections, and each of these guys had their own say. And as we learned last week, they put together a plan because they didn't like the fact that Daniel was like the favorite. Yeah. Daniel was doing all this great stuff, and all these other people are just like, they're taking their paycheck and going home. Daniel's like over and above, getting everything accomplished. So the King Darius says, hey, I'm gonna give you a promotion, and everything's gonna be good. Well, the other guys didn't like that, so they put together the plan, and we talked about the plan last week, which was something that was putting innocent Daniel into the lion's den. And that's where we ended last week. So I suppose we could start today on our outline with asking a question. Why didn't God prevent this? Why didn't he put a shield of protection around Daniel and keep him from having to go through this ordeal? He had promised through Psalm 5, verse 12, "For it is you who blesses the righteous man, O Lord." This is David talking to the Lord. "For it is you who blesses the righteous man, O Lord." I think we can conclude that Daniel was pretty righteous. Amen? Okay? You surround him with favor and as with a shield. So we ask ourselves, why didn't God prevent all this mess from happening? How do we reconcile in our minds and our hearts how things like this would happen to Daniel or to Job or to Jonah? How do righteous people end up getting caught up in all these difficult situations? And the confidence that they had in their God, Yahweh, Jehovah, Elohim, the reality for that is we realize that the purpose of God's shield around people doesn't always necessarily match what we think it should be. We look at a shield and we think it's impenetrable. Nothing's going to get past it. But sometimes God has a plan for that shield to allow certain things to get on the backside of it so he can be magnified. So God can be proclaimed to an even higher level than prior. When we see the fact that people are bound by our timelines, we live by a certain clock. God is timeless. He's looking at things thousands of years from now or hundreds of years from now, or he's looking at tomorrow. We don't know where God's focus is. But what we do know is that Jesus prayed, for the well-being of our souls in such a way that we need to be considering this. This is in John's 17th chapter, and this is the Lord is talking to his Father in heaven. I have given them your word, and the world has hated them because they are not of the world, even as I am not of the world. So he's talking about the disciples. He's got this group of followers, these people that are all in with Christ as the Messiah. And he's expressing his concerns to the Heavenly Father that they're being hated just because they're with Jesus, just like he's being hated. And this is a dialogue concerning the Jewish hierarchy. The high priest and the Sadducees, the Pharisees, they're all upset about Jesus because he's taken away their thunder. And when you do that, you're taking away their income. It's all about the Benjamins, right? Verse 15, I do not ask that you take them out of the world, but to keep them from the evil one. And in the Greek, the evil one, of course, relates back to Satan. Protect them from the impact that Satan would have on their lives. And the evil one, even if we belong to God, he's got his hand in all of our affairs anyhow. What does Satan say to the Lord in Job? He says, what have you been doing, Satan? And he says, well, I've been walking around to and fro trying to find who I can get change, meaning humanity. And the chance that we see coming up here is something that has to do with a lot of the things we would say would be based on looking at, say, the perspective of Peter. Peter had a different outlook on all this stuff. He was a strong man, and he had this perspective that comes to us, part of which Joanne read for us today. Submit yourselves for the Lord's sake to every human institution, whether to a king as the one in authority, or to governors as sent by him for the punishment of evildoers and the praise of those who do right. Wow. Submit yourselves for the Lord's sake for every human institution. So this is basically a part of where the Lord would say, render to Caesar what is Caesar's. That's why we have civil laws. We are to obey civil laws. We are not to go outside the constraints that laws forbid. That's why you only go 55. I almost got run over this morning coming to church on 30. I had my cruise gun set on 70. And these guys were like, zoom, zoom, zoom. I was thinking, they're getting ready for the Indy 500. It was like a column of like 6 cars, and they just were just to get in it. None of them had flashing lights. They were probably late for church. Or 2 governors as sent by him for the punishment of evildoers and the praise of those who do right. In other words, oftentimes, we get a positive comment because we've done the right thing, Somebody drops their wallet, and you're walking behind them, and you go, oh, sir, ma'am, here's your wallet. Oh, thank you, thank you. Not the guy who says, oh, cool. You don't get much praise for that. Usually what you'll get is 3 to 5 years. So, going back to Daniel in chapter 6, then the commissioners and the satraps began trying to find a ground of accusation against Daniel in regard to government affairs. Important, but they could find no ground of accusation or evidence of corruption, inasmuch as he was faithful. So, Peter's saying we have to follow the laws, we have to do this, we have to do that. Daniel, he was the picture of perfection in regards to his faithfulness to God and how he conducted himself in life. And Peter comes back to us and says, for such is the will of God, that by doing right you may silence the ignorance of foolish men. Well, I think we have like 120 foolish satraps, and we have a couple of foolish commissioners. And now they've made this commitment to themselves that they're going to do whatever it takes to put him in his place. And the only way that they could defeat Daniel would be to challenge his righteousness. Find a way to get him to do something according to all the things that his God demanded, but would be contrary to what King Darius's edict said. So the reality for what came on here then, we pick it up in verse 18. Servants, be submissive to your masters with all respect, not only to those who are good and gentle, but also to those who are unreasonable. For this finds favor if, for the sake of conscience toward God, a person bears up under sorrows when suffering unjustly. For what credit is there if, when you sin and are harshly treated, you endure it with patience? But if, when you do what is right and suffer for it, you patiently endure it, this finds favor with God. Verse 23, and while being reviled, he did not revile in return. While suffering, he uttered no threats. This is speaking about Jesus. But kept entrusting himself to him who judges righteously. Peter uses the example of Christ and his time of suffering, his trials, as the example about what we need to be doing when we look at life and try to figure out the ways to get through it and around it and doing it in the right way. It's so often easy for us to kind of bypass rules of life for convenience sake, to make things easier for us, to get around obstacles of rules and laws, and like going faster than 70 and a 55, or a 65, 65. But the things that happen for us in life is that oftentimes we remember that we have done things that don't please God, and we find ourselves in a little bit of a turmoil. God finds injustice in so many different ways, we oftentimes don't stop to think about how we might be a part of that. And the reality for what goes on here is what we see, that even Jesus kept entrusting himself to him, meaning the God the Father, who judges righteously. Paul wrote in Romans, never take your own revenge, beloved, but leave room for the wrath of God. For it is written, Vengeance is mine. I will get a new muffler. Vengeance is mine. I will repay, says the Lord. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. This is where we find ourselves on track for deliverance. Daniel's remarkable deliverance begins with his attitude in life and how he serves his Creator God. It's a significant change in the way that these other people are seeing someone live. You know, everybody was, in the day, I would imagine, everybody was out for themselves. They wanted to have the bigger house, the fancier camel, the best chariot or whatever, and they wanted to have the most jewelry, and they all wanted a purple robe. Oh, if you had a purple robe, that's like the Queen's crown in England, you know. It's the best, the purple robe, but purple robes cost a lot of money. And when we think about all of this going on, the afflictions of the righteous, where these guys are trying to find something wrong, we realize things like this. Many are the afflictions of the righteous, but the Lord delivers him out of them all. How many people know David was not perfect? And every hand goes up. King David was a rascal. I mean, if you think you can never be forgiven for something you've done, look at David. He was one of the worst guys in the Old Testament. And then he kind of like had this cousin named Solomon. He did the same thing. Bad things, naughty, naughty, naughty. So if you're worried about your station in life and forgiveness, you don't have to look any further than those guys. If it weren't for King David, the Lord would not be with us. That's where it all started. Hosanna, Son of David. That's Christ the Lord. So we realize that the Lord can deliver all of us out of that. And when we recognize that for a truth, then we see exactly what happens with Daniel, because there were some anxious moments in this chapter. The king is looking at all these different ways that he can get Daniel out of this mess. I mean, he knows in his heart of hearts, Daniel is the best thing that's happened to him since he arrived in town. And he trusts Daniel to be his advisor, his leader, his confidant. And all of a sudden now, because of this edict that he was coerced into signing, and Daniel, is exposed because they caught him praying to his God, not the god Darius, the king. He had no choice but to follow the letters of the law. And because a law, an edict written in the laws of the Medes and Persians could never be canceled. Wow. That's pretty tough. Verse 14, chapter 6. Then as soon as the king heard this statement, this was a statement about Daniel praying, he was deeply distressed and set his mind on delivering Daniel. And even until sunset, he kept exerting himself to rescue him. Then these men came by agreement to the king and said to the king, "Recognize, O king, that it is a law of the Medes and Persians that no injunction or statute which the king establishes may be changed." Verse 16. If you have your own Bibles, mark this one. Then the king gave orders, and Daniel was brought in and cast into the lion's den. And the king spoke and said to Daniel, "Your God, whom you constantly serve, will himself deliver you." Now, this is a pagan god, and we've learned in the past several weeks, he worships the god Bel, B-E-L, to protect him. And now he's telling Daniel, hey, the God that you worship, he'll take care of you. Don't worry about it. So here's the lion's den. Picture this big hole in the ground. Okay? This isn't like you would see at the circus with a cage. This is a big hole that's been dug into the ground, and it's got a 3 or 4 foot diameter hole in the top. And by rope, they lower people down into that, and that's like their jail. That's the kind of jail Christ was put into while he was at the palace of the high priest. And then they have on the side at ground level a separate door that they open to let the lions in. So here we have Daniel being, it doesn't say lowered down, does it? It says he was thrown into the lion's den. So conceivably that means they opened up the top and they just dropped him in. Have fun with the guys. And then they put a rock over top of it. Now, and I'm always curious about why they put a rock over top of that hole, because it's nothing you can reach. I mean, they have these in, you can see them in Israel, and it's like 12 foot, so, you know. Boy, I wish that rock wasn't there, I'd jump out. That's not going to happen. So then they opened the door, and in come the lions. And the king says, you know, your God who you constantly serve will himself deliver you. The stone was brought and laid over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the signet rings of his nobles, so that nothing would be changed in regard to Daniel. Then the king went off to his palace and spent the night fasting, and no entertainment was brought before him. This is an important point. Every night the king had the dancing harem come out. You know, he had 30 or 40 wives, you know, oh my gosh. I mean, talk about punishment. You know. But normally the king would have the harem come out and they would dance and do whatever they do, and then he'd pick one and then he'd go off to bed. He spent the night fasting. He didn't even have dinner. And no entertainment was brought before him, and his sleep fled from him. He's in his big bedroom chamber just tossing and turning, and he can't get his head wrapped back. He actually threw Daniel into that lion's den. Oh, man, what's going to happen now? The king basically has put himself in a position where the only person that he really, really trusted, right, is now in peril. And his sleep escapes him because he put himself in this position because he allowed the satraps and the other commissioners to have him write up this law for everybody to bow down and worship him. He's the new God. Darius is a god. Woohoo! And of course they lied in the beginning, if you recall last week, when they said all the commissioners and all the satraps. Of course, one commissioner wasn't there, and that was Daniel. So that began with a lie. And the king is torn apart with like this worry and this guilt, and how can this be? Why did I do this? And his torment was clearly shown in the way he wasn't able to rest, because he cared about Daniel. And he couldn't wait for morning. Now remember, this is just the first day. And the edict said 30 days in the lion's den. So what we see happen then is the king has this blessed relief. Yeah. Blessed relief. Verse number 19. Then the king arose at dawn, at the break of the day, and went in haste to the lion's den. When he had come near to the den, he cried out with a troubled voice. Oh, can you just think? He's gone in there expecting to hear, lions licking their chops. We want more. Rawr, rawr. When he had come near to the den, to Daniel, he cried out with a troubled voice. The king spoke and said to Daniel, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you constantly serve, been able to deliver you from the lions? And I'm guessing his voice was really troubled. It's like, it would be so cool if his God was real and he's alive. Wouldn't that? Oh, can you imagine? Wow, what a God that would be. He's better than Bel. Wow. Then Daniel spoke to the king. O king, live forever. Proper salutation. That's how you always address the king of Babylon, Persia, whoever. O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, and they have not harmed me. Inasmuch as I was found innocent before him, meaning the Lord, and also toward you. O king, I have committed no crime. So now at that point, I'm guessing Darius fainted. And then the guy slapped him a little bit, and he got up and, oh yeah, okay, cool. This is great, man. Is that really you, Daniel? There's nobody ventriloquist here? That's really Daniel talking to me. That's really Daniel talking to me. Oh, king, live forever. And that brings us to what we could say is some furious vengeance. Then the king was very pleased and gave orders for Daniel to be taken up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no injury whatever was found on him because he had trusted his God. Oh my, he trusted in his God. And this vengeance that I mentioned is something that happens because the king was just a little bit upset. You can imagine these guys put him in a position where he had no choice but to theoretically kill his best friend advisor. All because they wanted stuff. They wanted to be the people of wealth and to be in charge. And when things didn't go their way, what's the old saying? And pardon my language. Hell hath no fury like an angry woman. Wait till you see what the king does. We're talking about the ultimate vengeance here. The king then gave orders, and they brought those men who had maliciously accused Daniel, and they cast them, their children, and their wives into the lion's den. And they had not reached the bottom of the den before the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. Phew. Theologians believe that the average, what we could call, not murder, but, I don't know, elimination of people in a lion's den, there would have been 6 to 8 lions, typically 2 males and 4 to 6 females. And as we might know, the female lions were the hunters. You don't mess with women. Lions, yeah. Women lions, you don't mess with those. He goes ahead and throws not just the guys. Now look at how many people this is. I mean, how do you fit all those folks in that thing? I guess they had shifts, and the lions were pretty hungry. I mean, they hadn't eaten for a while. But not just the officials, but their wives and their children. They eliminated the family line of those guys. Darius was really upset. This was over and above what you might think. But then we see him come back to reality. Some glorious praise. Some glorious praise. And this comes to us in verses 25 through 27. Then Darius the king wrote to all the peoples, nations, and men of every language who were living in all the land. So he's writing to every person in every region of the Medo-Persian Babylonian Empire. This would be from Turkey and Egypt and Sudan all the way over to India and China and north into southern Europe. Greece, Czechoslovakia, that area. All this was a part of the empire. And everybody spoke a different language, right? So he has it all translated into their own languages, sends it out. May your peace abound. I make a decree that in all the dominion of my kingdom, men are to fear and tremble before the God of Daniel. Wow. For he is the living God and enduring forever. and his kingdom is one which will not be destroyed, and his dominion will be forever. This is a pagan king, Darius, who worships 90-some different gods. And all of a sudden, he's made a decree. What's with a decree in the Persian Empire? It can't be changed. It can't be revoked. And his dominion, meaning God's dominion, will be forever. He delivers and rescues and performs signs and wonders in heaven and on earth, who has also delivered Daniel from the power of the lions. Wow. Needless to say, Darius was impressed. I think he figured it out. And all of a sudden, all of these things have created what we would call a happy ending to this story. Daniel is rescued. God is glorified. The king is happy. And the enemies are vanquished. And we can say they were enemies because these guys really had no concern about the welfare of the king, Darius, or the life of the empire. They were worried about themselves. So this has all been eliminated. And all of a sudden we have this kind of like happy postscript. So this Daniel enjoyed success in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. At this point in his life, Daniel would have been in his 80s. Can you imagine throwing this 80-year-old guy down into the lion's den, expecting destruction of him in a heartbeat, with 6 or 8 lions? I mean, that wouldn't even have been an hors d'oeuvre, Here we see the declaration that's been made by the king. And as we have come to find out, to the end of Daniel's life, and we'll learn more about that in the weeks to come, he becomes this really special person in the life of humanity. And that's why it was so important to talk through this book of Daniel. Sometimes expository preaching can get kind of mundane. And that's what this is. We're going verse by verse. That's expository preaching. And to try and figure out how everything fits together, we come to a place where we realize that there's other things we consider. Solomon wrote, an arrogant man stirs up strife, but he who trusts in the Lord will prosper. From that point forward, Darius prospered greatly. Daniel prospered until the end of his days. He got to see the reality of all the Jews that wanted to go back to Jerusalem. They got to go back to Jerusalem and rebuild the city. With Hezekiah, they were able to get going, and Daniel's witnessing that, and he stayed to be the loyal servant of the king, or kings, whoever was in charge. Matthew tells us, let your light shine before men in such a way that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven. That's one that we strive to live by every day. Amen? We're Alice's Bible that people read. That's who we are. I send out a devotion every morning to several people, and one of them here this past week had to do with that. You may be the only Bible someone will read today. And how about acting like it? It can be hard. But it was hard for Daniel until he placed all his faith and trust in God. Daniel said, he delivers and rescues and performs signs and wonders in heaven and on earth, who also delivered Daniel from the power of the lions. It's the reality of a story that we hear when we're little kids. Dottie and I talked about this the other day. We had these little cutouts of characters in the Bible, and you would put them on the flannel board, and the teacher would say, and Daniel didn't get killed in the lion's den. Isn't that nice? And the kids would go, yeah. Lions, huh? I'd like to have a lion. But, and oftentimes we don't understand the backstory, do we? And when we learn what created the situation where Daniel had to go through this, we're like, God's pretty cool. God had a plan. And all of these stages that we will find in prophecy, whether it would be Daniel talking or one of the other prophets, major or minor, we see all of this stuff come into the New Testament as fulfilled and complete. Don't ever let anybody tell you you don't need the Old Testament. If we didn't have the Old Testament, guess what? We wouldn't have a New Testament. The New Testament only exists to show the fulfillment of what the Old Testament prophets gave us. And praise God, because that's what makes things special for us. And because we understand the whole story now, we can rely on the fact that Daniel's calling to be this child of God in a difficult place is our calling too. If we listen. That's the key. We have to hear and wait and find out what God has for us. So we're going to conclude by reading verse number 26 here together. You ready? Book, chapter, verse. Daniel 6:26. I make a decree that in all the dominion of my kingdom, men are to fear and tremble before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God, enduring forever and ever.